Marisha here, and a couple weeks ago I posted on my trip to Bletchley Park. And in that video, I mentioned that I picked up this little guy in their gift shop, Instructions for American Servicemen in Britain, 1942. So I marked a few passages that stood out to me for one reason or another, and today I'm going to go through those with you. So, the very first thing I'm going to talk about is immediately after the introduction. The very first section is titled No Time to Fight Old Wars, and it starts like this. If you come from an Irish American family, you may think of the English as persecutors of the Irish. Or you may think of them as enemy redcoats who fought against us in the American Revolution and the War of 1812. But there is no time today to fight old wars over again or bring up old grievances. So, what stood out to me is that the very first thing in this instruction book is addressed to Irish Americans. And the fact that, like, England did persecute Ireland for centuries. Not American Revolution, which is universal. All Americans would have learned about the Revolution and would have had some ideas about redcoats, maybe. But Irish Americans. And it's true that obviously the Irish American, like the potato famine and the great wave of Irish immigration to the US is more recent than the American Revolution. But it still struck me as odd that that's what they were leading with. And so to me, that suggests there must have been a large number of soldiers in the American military in the 40s that came from an Irish background, that the War Department thought this is what we're going to lead with. And maybe it shouldn't be a huge surprise when you consider how many Americans claim some Irish ancestry. I know it can be annoying to Irish people when Americans go over to Ireland and say things like, I'm 1/16th Irish, right? But it is true that there are more people of Irish ancestry living in the US than there are living in Ireland. And that is a direct result of British persecution of the Irish, right? It's potato famine, but also oppression in general of the Irish by the English. I won't get into a modest proposal and all of that, but it still was a little bit like, oh wow, they led with that. Okay. The next section is the British are tough. Don't be misled by the British tendency to be soft-spoken and polite. If they need to be, they can be plenty tough. The English language didn't spread across the oceans and over the mountains and jungles and swamps of the world because these people were panty waists. So of course, the reason that I pulled this out is that they use the term panty waists. Like you're not gonna see that at all in modern communications from like the government. But that aside, this is tapping into I think what is still a current idea, a stereotype of the British, that because they are reserved and they're polite, they're also meek. Now, I think plenty of them are meek, actually. And when we're talking about not military things, but talking about maybe social things, or, for example, men in the dating scene, they're definitely way more timid than Americans. But um, it is true that there's this American stereotype of the Brits tied to the way that the British people are more reserved. Um, there's another section in here called British Reserved, Not Unfriendly, that I think I'll do a whole separate video on. But both of those sections are the American idea that because the British are like just sort of keep to themselves more than Americans do, that they are somehow like weak. And that's not true at all. Although I would say I think that for both countries, America and the UK, that subsequent generations are not as tough, but that's a different topic, and that's not a UK US thing, that's a generational thing. The next section is called Age Instead of Size, and the idea in it is absolutely current and still relevant. The idea that Americans take pride in size. We're a huge country. We have huge things. We have big houses, we have big cars, and we also have like the biggest, lots of random stuff. And if if you're from the UK and you've not been, you might not be aware, but there is this kind of culture in the US, particularly in the middle states, of making like the biggest whatever. So you might be driving down the highway in like Iowa or Kansas or something, and you'll see a sign that up the road you can pull off and see the world's largest rocking chair, and it's like, this giant thing just on the side of the road, and it's like 2 stories high or whatever. We have lots of those: largest ball of twine, largest paper clip, what it's like, just whatever random stuff that people made giant versions of as roadside attractions. um and there's classier biggest things. I mean, we have the Grand Canyon, um things like that. But in the UK, right, it's like you'll find the British care little about size, not having the biggest of many things as we do. For instance, London has no skyscrapers. So that example is outdated. I laughed when I read that, because London has tons of skyscrapers now, and there are plans for making more of them. Um, but the point is that instead of size, Brits are going to point out their historical things, age, right? They have, this mentions Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's Cathedral, and the Tower of London, which was built almost 1,000 years ago. So it's, the differences in what does each country kind of do well or take pride in. That's still relevant, but the London has no skyscrapers actually made me laugh. Definitely dates this material. The next section I really, really like. It's just 3 sentences. It's actually part of that, the keep out of arguments section. The British don't know how to make a good cup of coffee. You don't know how to make a good cup of tea. It's an even swap. And this sentiment is still relevant today when we talk about US versus UK differences. When I'm doing it, and when I think most people who are doing it, if they're like, if they have a YouTube channel, or if a Brit and American who like know each other, they work together, they're friends or whatever, they're talking about it, it's with an attitude of friendly banter, right? We're just teasing each other because we know, like, we're allies, we have this special relationship. We also kind of refer to each other maybe as cousins or whatever across the pond. But there are people who are rude about it. There's an edge to it, and they're being rude. You see this more online in comment sections where it's like, oh, all Americans are fat, or all British people have terrible teeth, right? Like that kind of thing. Um, and that's really frustrating. And I have seen that to a small extent with a few of my students. They'll say stuff about America. They'll be like, Britain's better than America. It's like, really? Have you been to America? And the answer, of course, is no. But I tell them, like, neither country is better than the other. They're just different, right? So what this country does better, this country has something else that they do better, right? It's like, so I really like the coffee tea thing. Um, you know, uh, Literally, is that the same? There are plenty of Americans who have adopted tea culture, and they know how to make a good cup of tea, and coffee is a lot more popular here now than it used to be. But the sentiment is like absolutely right on the mark. It's, the differences between us, they should be treated as, yeah, just kind of like that friendly banter, like, oh, why do you call it pavement when like all of it is pavement, right? For my American audience, they call what we call a sidewalk pavement. And for Americans, that's really confusing, because for us, pavement is the material. Like, the street is also pavement, like, it's all pavement. Um, Little things like that, you just have a laugh over them, right? Don't get into this, like, oh, one country's better than the other, because they're not. They're just better at different things. Um, and then one of the last things that I'm going to point out is in this same section, it kind of ends with, the British will welcome you as friends and allies. But remember that crossing the ocean doesn't automatically make you a hero. There are housewives in aprons and youngsters in knee pants in Britain who have lived through more high explosives and air raids than many soldiers saw in first class barrages in the last war. I think this is really important because there's still kind of an idea in some American circles that, like, well, we won the war for them, right? Like, we came over and we saved the day. And that's incredibly inaccurate and um, just really bad optics as well, right? This is very timely because just this week, Trump was mouthing off again and saying that, yeah, we came over and we won the war for them, and you'd be speaking German or Japanese if it weren't for us, right? There's definitely that subculture, that element within American culture of some people who have that attitude, and they will say that to people, or you'd be speaking German if it wasn't for us, not realizing just how successful the British and other allies were at keeping Hitler at bay, and like that, and especially if you go to Bletchley Park, right? Like the work that they were doing in like with Enigma and everything was like crucial to the war effort. Um, it's just it's so it's such bad form. It's such bad form, and a lot of Americans, I think, don't realize just how much Britain and the rest of Europe suffered during the war. Like we never experienced anything close to it, right? We had the attack on Pearl Harbor, and that's it. We didn't have our entire country like dug up with trenches. We didn't have to send our kids out to the countryside for fear that they were going to get killed in a bomb, right? Like in the Blitz. And this, right? Like the American military understands it, right? It's not people from the military who are saying things like this even today, right? Um Trump, President Bone Spurs, it's people like that that are saying things like that. But here earlier in the section, they're saying, right, you can rub a Britisher the wrong way by telling him we came over and won the last one. Each nation did its share, but Britain remembers that nearly 1 million of her manhood died in the last war. America lost 60,000 in the action. Right? When you look at the numbers and the sacrifices, I've always been aware of this as someone who was a history teacher and history minor, but especially coming over here and going to places like Bletchley Park, it's a good reminder of just how much like Britain went through. Like we didn't have rationing the way that they did, right? So it wasn't just how their military suffered, but also how the people suffered. Civilians in America in World War II. Yeah, we had some rationing, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it was over here, and remained so over here for a long time. That's where the whole idea of like British food is bad comes from, because it was bad following the war because they just couldn't get stuff, right? Like it's not bad anymore, but it was, and there was a reason for it, and it was because of the war and like the sacrifices that the British people and other Europeans, the French and everything made during that time. I think it's really poor form for Americans to not inform themselves about that and be aware of that. And I think part of the reason why I'm doing this video today is it's timely for me, because yesterday I went to the No Kings protest in London. Only here they call it No Tyrants, to be respectful of King Charles, right? Um, and to that end, I just want to read like acts from the actual introduction to this, which is: America and Britain are allies. Hitler knows that they are both powerful countries, tough and resourceful. He knows that they, with the other United Nations, mean his crushing defeat in the end. So it's only common sense to understand that the first and major duty Hitler has given his propaganda chiefs is to separate Britain and America and spread distrust between them. Um, And seeing the rise of fascism in the US, in other parts of the world, we're seeing it in Hungary and Italy, and there are elements in the UK as well, like the Reform Party, who would love to follow in that vein. Um, to see that happen when World War II is still in living memory. It won't be for much longer, but it still is in living memory. To have a grandfather who fought in World War II in the European concert under Patton, and to see like the subsequent generation absolutely betray the sacrifices that Americans and Britons and the French and people from all over the Commonwealth made during World War II to fight Nazis and to fight fascists, and to see people just throw that all away and support fascist ideology is absolutely heartbreaking to me. And, um, here you're reminded, I think, of World Wars One and Two a lot more than in the US. They do, I talked about this in my VE Day video. They do a lot better job here of kind of keeping those wars in mind and the lessons that were learned from them or should have been learned from them. And I think it is a failing on America's part to not have done a better job of educating its subsequent generations on exactly what was happening and what we were fighting, so that they can recognize the that history is repeating itself. Um, and when I went to this protest yesterday, one of the main speakers wasn't American. A lot of the people who were there were Americans who live abroad. They live in the UK, but there were plenty of Britons there as well. My friend and I actually met a woman while we were heading to it who was English, and she was like, I don't know if English people are like allowed at this. And we're like, of course they are. This is for everybody, because this what's happening in America is not only affecting America. Like what Trump does is going to have ripple effects around the globe. You've already seen it with his tariffs, right? But the rise in fascism anywhere is a problem for everyone. It means that it emboldens people in other places then to follow suit. And one of the speakers there was British, and they're talking about that acknowledgement, and talking about what is Keir Starmer going to do? Is he cozying up to Trump? How is he going to respond to this? And all of the ramifications that, what the US does has for Ukraine, for Gaza, for all sorts, for climate change, all sorts of things. And I think, you know, reading this and going to places like Bletchley Park and being reminded of the the special relationship and just how much we do have in common ideologically, right? That like, and it talks about that in here as well, right? That we were both countries that um, support and uphold democracy and freedom of speech and religion and all of that. It's important to me to focus on that and to focus on the people in the US and the people in the UK and the people in Canada and France and Australia and all these other places that did go to No King's events and are speaking out against this and are, in a way, creating an alliance that is sort of this generation's version of what they had to do in the 40s. So I don't think I intended this to end on such a political note. I really did just want to talk about some of the interesting things that I found in this, but I can't ignore it. I can't ignore what's happening in the world and that is affecting, again, it's a global issue. It's not just a US issue, but obviously as an American it feels very personal as well. Next video, I'll try to have something that's a little bit more apolitical, I guess. But in the meantime, like, subscribe, tell your friends how gnarly this channel is, and I'll see you next time.